YouTube vinyl community, David Leaf fans, random people on the internet. My name is Giggens. We are here today with David Leaf, author, filmmaker, professor, super nice guy. Great to see you again, David. Thanks for being on the show.
Giggens, it is always great to be on your show. I even like emailing you, so you're an even better guy.
It's been fun chatting with you over email. You like I've said before, your words have been a huge part of my life for discovering the band for the Beach Boys and a lot of other things. I've got the Unknown Marx Brothers behind me. I've got the U.S. versus John Lennon, and the Beautiful Dreamer DVD. I should have grabbed that too. But you have been such a big part of my life for discovering the things that I love. So being able to talk to you is like, whoa, dude, it's really him. It's pretty cool. But we're here today.
It is me.
Because this, it's out. It's so good. God only knows the story of Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys, and the California Myth, the third edition of it. I have devoured this thing. It was something that I just plowed through happily. What has it been like for you to have this back on the shelves? It's been out of print for so long. So what did it mean to you to have this back out there for the fans?
Well, people were asking me for copies for the last 35 years, and I ran out of copies.
Yeah.
So I used to use them when I would go for job interviews to try to get a job. It was like, oh, here's something I did, and it worked once upon a time. Even if they never read it, they were happy to take it. Getting the book back in print has been just this unbelievably, inexplicably time machine kind of journey, because I had to come face to face with the much younger self that I was when I wrote the original book back in 77, early 78. And when I was a journalist, I was starting out, I was a struggling writer. And through a remarkably bizarre series of circumstances, I ended up with a contract to write the original book. And I wrote it from the point of view of somebody who was a fan, an obsessive fan, and somebody who, the way I describe it, it's like I wanted the book to grab the world by the collar and kind of shake it. It's like, don't you understand who this Brian Wilson guy is?
Yes.
That was really one of the things that was driving me. That because I talked to people about Brian Wilson and they go, "Who's that?" And I'd say, "Oh, he's the guy, the Beach Boys guy. He made Pet Sounds." And they go, "Oh, isn't he in bed all the time?" Or they'd say something like that.
Right.
And it infuriated me. So I started as a journalist in college and worked in news and sports after college. And so telling stories was what I loved to do. Studying Edward R. Murrow, as I mentioned in the book, I realized one could tell a story and in a way change the world.
Yeah. So
way back years before the original edition, when I was in college, I tell this to my students when we watch Beautiful Dreamer documentary in my Docs That Rock, Docs That Matter course.
So cool.
I say to them, when I was your age, I just had this idea that I was going to move to California, write a book about Brian Wilson, become his friend, and help him finish Smile. And
no big deal.
and they kind of laugh, and I laugh with them. I said, it was an insane idea.
Yeah.
But part of my job is, or at least as I see it as a professor, is to help students get into the real world. They're in UCLA. These kids are so smart.
Yeah.
They're by the time they get to one of my classes, they're succeeding at UCLA. There's very little academically that I can teach them, but I can teach them from my experiences, how to be successful and how to find success. And it doesn't matter what you want to be. The point I make to them is I had this wild dream, beautiful dream, if you will, And through dedication and devotion and discipline and determination, it actually came true.
It's incredible, and you feel that in the book. Like your way of writing is so conversational, but so heartfelt. Nothing about it comes across as
Thank you.
pretentious or like, "Hey, look at me." It's like, no, like I really care about this band. I care about this guy named Brian. It started off as being a fan to becoming a friend. Um, what has that journey been like for you in terms of like, because in the book you detail stuff just like going out like swimming together at the YMCA or getting lunch together. Like it's such a normalized thing at this point where you guys just hang out. Like, do you still pinch yourself, or what's that like?
Well, it's always been surreal.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm on the telephone talking to Paul McCartney about Pet Sounds. How I'm talking to George Martin about Brian Wilson. How much more surreal can it be?
Mind blowing.
As I say in the book, Brian says to me, he says, "I really want you to be there when I'm going to be finishing Smile." And it's like, I'm going like, every day? And he goes, "Yeah, every day." and so it never became matter of fact. It never became pinch me. It just, I liken it, those displays when people take dominoes and they set up like tens of thousands of dominoes and they hit one and then it goes and it makes all these wild displays.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like my life was.
That's so cool.
And if you took out any one of those dominoes along the way, it would just stop and all the other things wouldn't happen.
Absolutely.
So maybe I'm the domino. I don't know.
I mean, it's an amazing story to read because like one of the things that I really enjoy about this new edition is that it covers the last 30 years. And there's, as far as I know, nothing really written about the Beach Boys in detail or Brian in detail in the last 30 years. It kind of stops around Kokomo and like, oh, he's gone on tour since then. Great, end of book. So this has been instrumental to learning more about who he is and what he's been doing in that time, because he's made some of the best albums of his career in the last 20 years.
Certainly in the last 35 years. Since the 88 solo album.
Yeah.
I think, the thing that I in figuring out what the new edition could be, there were a couple of things that I said to the publisher. I said, first of all, the update has to be big enough that people don't feel ripped off when they buy it.
Right.
And the original contract called for an update of no more than 30,000 words. And so I'm writing along and, it's 1994 and I've gotten to 30,000 words. So I sent him an email. I said, I think I'm going to need 40. And he wrote back fine and got to 50 and I wrote him another. It's like, I just kept going.
Yeah.
It could have been another 20,000 or 30,000 words because all I really covered, for the most part, what I covered was what I did with him. It's not a definitive soup to nuts biography.
Right.
Because I feel like if you want to know about an album, a movie, anything, you go to Wikipedia and it has all the details.
Yeah.
It has so much information. So it's not that I'm against information. It's just that I didn't want to waste my space so much on it. I wanted to put in things there that I felt told the story of my journey with Brian.
And that's exactly how it feels. And you mentioned in the book that, I forget who was asking you about interviewing Brian. And he said, don't ask him yes or no questions. Ask him the feel of something. And that's exactly what this book, to me, it feels like. It's like, yeah, it's not a day-by-day recording session history. It's like, no, you're just living with this guy, what it was like to be around him and work with him and go on tour with him, like what that feeling was like. And it comes across so tangible in the book. Like you get this warm idea of who Brian is. You feel that spirit from him. So it's so beautifully written to like, yeah, the details and the facts are out there elsewhere. This is him as a person. And that's to me more fascinating.
Well, it's also very challenging because how do you explain who he is as a person without revealing too much about the private things that happen that are nobody's business?
Absolutely.
and without people feeling, oh, geez, this guy's boring. Yeah, he's great in the studio, but gee, what a boring life.
He's watching the baseball game. Yeah.
Well, he likes going to the baseball game.
Yeah.
He likes, it's he is extraordinary as an artist, and because of that, and all the experiences he's been through, he has an extraordinary point of view.
Yeah.
But in terms of what he wants to do on a day-to-day basis, it can be as simple as like him calling and saying, "Hey, do you want to go swimming today? Hey, do you want to go to the movies today?" And he has a certain magical touch in that he knows exactly the right moment to do something. I'll give you an example. I was hired to produce, I can't tell you the exact year. It was in the 90s. I didn't tell this story in the book, but I was hired to write and produce this special on the history of the CBS television network.
Interesting.
Myself and another producer were hired. On Monday, we were hired. On Tuesday, we got the contracts. On Wednesday, we got the production schedule. On Thursday, the man who hired us was fired. On Friday, the guy who replaced that guy, canceled the program. But because we already had a contract, we got paid.
Not bad.
Not bad. Literally the next day, Brian called and said, "Hey, there's something I need you to work on. Are you available for the next couple of months?" Now, if that guy hadn't been fired and the show hadn't been canceled, and because, as I say in the book, whenever I worked with Brian on something, I was there as his friend, not on his payroll.
Right.
I needed the money I made from that CBS special. It didn't happen.
Yeah.
But now it's like, I got a couple of months, and Brian wants to do something. Okay, cool. What is it?
Yeah.
And things like that seem to happen all the time with him. He just there's something truly magical about it. If that's the right word, I don't know.
I can dig that. I mean, did that end up being the Just Wasn't Made for These Times documentary at that time?
No.
Okay.
No.
Man,
no, it was after that. I don't remember what it was. No, because I was hired by Don Was to work on the I Just Wasn't Made for These Time doc.
Yeah, right.
And I watched it a couple of times in the last 6 months. I kind of had to relive the entire 40 years since I wrote the last edition,
right.
in doing the update. And I can't more highly recommend that documentary. It's on YouTube. It's only something like 75 minutes.
Yeah.
But there's a truth to it that I probably didn't realize it at the time. It was I took it for granted. But the things that Carl Wilson says in there, and the things that Marilyn Wilson says in there, the things that Brian says in there, the footage of Brian and Carl and their mother singing In My Room. I mean, it's talk about one of a kind moments.
Right.
And so it's definitely worth one's time to revisit because, people say, well, why did Brian stop working with the Beach Boys? And Don Was asks him, and he says, well, they wanted to make their kind of music and I wanted to make my kind of music.
Right.
He is so simple isn't the right word, clear. He's very clear on who he is and what he wants to do. Back in the mid 60s, when he had that string of hits, he had complete power and control over everything.
Yeah.
And as that was worn away through circumstance and whatever the other reasons were, he lost that power. He lost that control. But when he has it, when people say, what do you want to do, Brian? He's still Brian Wilson.
I mean, that's a great segue to what I wanted to ask you next. For me, when I was growing up in the 90s, his presence in the Beach Boys wasn't really there. He wasn't on tour with them. He wasn't doing much with them beyond the odd thing here and there. So like when I started really discovering them, or Brian's solo career rather, like Imagination was kind of new, and then eventually Smile came out and Getting Over My Head, and then from there it was a string of albums. What was it like being around him during those times? Because his band it's top notch. They bring those songs to life, and he was just on fire. Like when Lucky Old Son came out, I remember being like blown away. It was like the best thing I'd ever heard in such a long time. Like, what was his spirit like during those times?
Well, the those of us, and I talk about this small group of, I'll call us beach nuts.
Yeah.
We were obsessed, and we believed that if Brian Wilson were to finish Smile, that he would then feel free to create new music.
Yeah.
And going to London to see the world premiere of Lucky Old Son, good, bad, or indifferent, it was a pretty courageous thing to do. I'm going to debut a brand new album live.
I remember reading about it. Yeah.
But we sat there and listened to it, and it was like, I mean, I'm just getting goosebumps thinking about it. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And his confidence in that era was supreme.
Yeah.
He really and I think I can trace it back to the first solo tour, when he first started touring.
Yeah.
Because that seemed, I won't spoil what I write about it in the book,
right,
in terms of what I thought about it at the time.
Yeah.
But I watched him grow during those tours. And the Radio City Music Hall tribute, which was something that I had been working on with Chip Racklin for well over half a decade. I mean, I had the idea in the 90s. No one ever thought Brian Wilson was going to tour and play. So it's like, well, why don't we do a tribute to Brian Wilson? I had worked on an Elvis tribute. I had worked on other tributes. And this is pretty cool when other artists come and perform the songs. How great for him to be sitting there. Well,
right.
And then he started touring. And I was like, wait a second. It took suddenly the tribute took on a completely different dimension.
Yeah.
It meant he could play at it. The original conception of the tribute before he started touring was a group of hand-picked songs and then a full performance of Pet Sounds, which had never been done before. Then all of a sudden he tours Pet Sounds, and it's like, well, that was going to be at the tribute. and so his confidence grew, because I think, I don't want to, I'm not going to play psychologist, but the fact that Pet Sounds was viewed commercially as a relative failure.
Right.
That Capitol Records rushed out a greatest hits album and helped bury Pet Sounds.
Yeah, absolutely.
That regardless of the success of Good Vibrations, Smile ended up being stillborn.
Yeah.
Well, it's unimaginable what that would do to your sense of confidence.
Especially when he's so young. He put his heart and soul into it. He's like 22, 23, and he made Pet Sounds. It's like you're a kid. It's just like your vision is there. You put your heart and soul into it. For the record company to be like, we're going to put out your old stuff instead. Like, that must have crushed him.
It wasn't helpful. But as we see, he came back. He rebounded pretty quickly with Good Vibrations.
Yeah.
And the Smile music he made was unquestionably the most adventurous and exciting and amazing music of his career. And unfortunately, that got crushed. In the film Beautiful Dreamer, I think he gave the most honest answer he's ever, because every interview he has done since 1967, he's been asked about Smile.
Right.
And I felt like when I asked him that question when we were making the movie, it was, and I talk about this in the book, of course, it was like, okay, if I answer you, will this be the last time I have to answer this effing question? Because I'm a little bit tired of answering it. And then he says, and he answers, I'll tell you from my heart, there were 4 reasons why I didn't finish it. And how can you argue with the guy who says, I'll tell you from my heart, here are the reasons.
Yeah.
And so I got to, obviously I started as a fanboy, and I started a fanzine, Pet Sounds, back in '77, which led to the book contract, which led to me getting to know him. There's a story in the book which I'm sure you were just like shaking your head at about the first time he came to my apartment, because it's like
nuts.
It makes no sense. Makes no. So there's you can call it serendipity, you can call it fate, you can call it destiny. If I had never moved to California, none of it would have happened.
Obviously. Right.
So that's, my mother was afraid to fly, and so she was afraid when I was flying.
Yeah.
And I was flying to New York a lot back in the 1990s and in the 2000s. You have to fly so much. I said, Mom, that's my business. I have to go where the networks are to sell the projects.
Right.
And then I came up with an analogy she hated. I said, Mom, if you want to get hit by a car, you have to cross the street against traffic. That's you got to go where it is.
Right.
And so I came where the myth was. I came where the Beach Boys were. I came where Brian was. As you read how I met them when I first got here, it's like there's this series of events that do not make any rational sense.
Right.
But it was a destiny. I think it was Vin Scully, the old Los Angeles Dodgers announcer, who used to say, destiny is where preparation meets opportunity.
Oh, I like that
intersection.
I like that.
And so I was ready. And the opportunity presented itself.
Yeah.
And the reason I got to write the book, I don't think I talked about it in this new edition because I didn't want to go into the whole story, but I was hired to do photo research on a book called Sand Tracks, Growing Up with the Beach Boys, by another author. And he was a TV and film writer. And right after I got hired, he sold a TV miniseries. And he said to the publishers, he said, I don't have time to write the book. So I wrote them this impassioned 3-page letter. Well, it was actually only 2.5 pages, but I can picture it, saying that rather than it being about somebody who grew up in Southern California with the Beach Boys as the background to their lives in the 60s in California, how about the book being about somebody who moved to California because of the Beach Boys music? And okay, they went for it. And so again, it took all these circumstances just for me to get in front of them, to get hired by them. There was a little article about me in the Village Voice in 1977 that the publishers saw. And, oh, that's the guy we can hire to be the photo researcher. So just all these amazing things happened. And because of Pet Sounds, I met friends of Brian's who were like, oh, this seems like a sincere effort to talk about the music.
Right.
And so that's always been the focus of my writing. Does what I'm writing about in this book relate to the artist and his journey?
Right.
That's what it was about in the first one. That's what it was about in the update. That's what it's about in this massive update, which I think if you did a word count, it's well more than half the size of the original 1978 book.
I mean, it's a huge book. I mean, the update itself is gigantic. Like when I first saw this thing, I was like, "Holy moly! It's a moose! It's a lot to it." But for me and a lot of other people, because I've been talking about you and this book for a while now, even before I knew that you were gonna, I didn't know you were gonna reissue it. I would just talk about it, and so it's always been on the back burner. People like being like trying to find copies online and stuff. So I already know of a handful of people that have picked it up and have started reading it already. And they've all had that same reaction. Like they just feel the warmth from this, because as an outsider, as a fan, we see Brian as a warm person. We see him as a really caring, deep person. We feel for him. And that's exactly the spirit that comes across in the book. So
Thank you.
for sure, it's one of those things where it's like I don't know if I want to say it's like realize like, oh yeah, it's exactly who we think he is, or like, because we don't want to know the whole story. We don't want to know everything. Like it's a little bits and pieces here and there, make it fun. Because I think it's too much to know everything about somebody unless you're a good friend of them. But like, so like that kind of leads me to like the '80s with him.
Yes, it does.
Because you did the promo stuff for his first record, his first solo album. What was your contact like during that era? Because that's such a scary time in his life. Looking back at it, like I guess from an outsider's point of view, being under surveillance constantly. What was your interaction like with him at that point?
Well, I didn't have that much interaction with him. Once Dr. Landy was hired by the Beach Boys to keep Brian alive,
Yeah,
which he did.
right.
Landy would invite me into certain moments so that I could participate. For example, when I was hired by a production company, very successful production company, to write the 1986 Beach Boys 25th anniversary special,
Yeah,
which had Ray Charles and Three Dog Night and the Everly Brothers and a lot of cool people on it.
it's so good. It's online.
And I don't know whom, but I was told that I could be hired to write on the special, but I couldn't go to Hawaii where it was being shot.
Oh,
And because there are certain people who think I'm too pro Brian in my work. And so Dr. Landy said, no, he's coming to Hawaii.
oh my God.
So I was kind of I mentioned in the book, the KGB has useful assets. I was like a useful asset. When it came time in 1990 for the twofers, the CDs of the Capitol catalog to be done,
Yeah.
I got the job in large part because Dr. Landy insisted that I be hired.
Wow. Damn.
So the experience with what happened in 1988 with Brian's solo album, I had been in the studio. Landy had invited me to the studio once, long before the album even started, to hear some of Brian's songs. I had been invited to hear the work in progress, and I don't even know that I want to say I was impressed. It just was like I was trying to figure it out. What is going on here?
Yeah.
And here's again where these weird coincidences happen. I got hired on a television series as a staff writer, and 2 weeks after I got hired, the Writers Guild went on strike.
Oh, jeez.
So I'm now on strike as a writer. I'm not allowed to work. I have to go to a picket line a certain number of hours every day.
Yeah.
The rest of the day, what am I going to do? And when I told Bob Merlis at Warner Brothers Records about that, he says, "Oh, why don't you do the press kit for us? Why don't you do the new press bio for Brian? Why don't you work on the electronic press kit?" And it was like, yeah.
Yeah.
And that really took me into, we talk about funhouse mirrors. This was not a funhouse mirror. This was, what the hell is happening?
Absolutely.
And I got deeper and deeper into it. And it was a really scary time to be a friend of Brian's.
I can only imagine.
It was clear that this guy was using Brian for his economic gain, for his fame game, to make himself important. It just was tragic to kind of helplessly watch. And then I talk about, one thing in the book that I did where I was actually able to help. And, there's no, it's, people look at the timeline and they try to understand things. What inspired Brian in the mid 60s to write the songs about love that he did. Well, he had crushes like in high school.
Right.
He fell in love. He got married. So his best love music was made in the early years of his marriage with Marilyn.
Yeah.
He started dating Melinda Wilson when she was Melinda Ledbetter in 1986. And I think it's fair to say that Brian's first solo album has the best group of songs on it of all of his solo albums.
It's so good.
And so he was, those songs weren't all written while they were dating, but an awful lot of them were. So there was that was, she was the kind of happiness in his life, while the rest of his life was, he was on, you used the word surveillance. It was worse than surveillance. He was being told what to do every waking hour.
Horrifying. I'm sure you've seen the movie Love and Mercy about Brian.
Yeah.
Was Paul Giamatti's portrayal of Landy pretty accurate? What was it like to experience that?
Oh, I love Paul Giamatti.
Yeah.
I think it was a pretty good portrayal. I mean, I always think of him like a rattlesnake. And there's the rattle, the warning, and then the strike. And the man who, we were all bystanders. Brian was the one who was, as he put it, in prison for 9 years.
Absolutely.
And I think either the day it finally ended or the day after is when he called Andy Paley and said, "You available? Let's make some music." It doesn't seem feasible to imagine that someone of Brian's talent could have been put in a box like that.
And that's the thing that I found really interesting about your book. At one point, was in 1990 or 91, you told Carl what was happening. Like, you broke the news to him there, I guess, or maybe he knew some of what was happening, but you mentioned having a conversation with him after like the Primetime Live special came out and everything. Like, what was it like talking to Carl about some of that? If you can talk, you don't have to talk about it, but like if you're able to, what was that moment kind of like?
Well, I don't really want to talk about any specific moment. It was just, it was, if you were a friend of Brian's, you were concerned.
Yeah.
And you spoke to people who might be able to affect change. And I think, Melinda was the driving force through that period in terms of what ultimately happened. It was just very tough for everybody.
Yeah.
Throughout, Brian, he describes his willpower, and he uses the same line. He says, "My last name is Wilson, so I guess I have great willpower." Yeah. My goodness, he's 80 years old, and nobody in 1974 would have thought he would have gotten to 80. Nobody in 1982 would have thought he was going to get to 80. Nobody in 1990 would have thought he would have gotten to 80.
Yeah.
So his survival alone is triumphant. But what I wanted to celebrate in this new edition is his artistic redemption.
Oh yeah.
I think that's really what I focused on, and what in the short run and the long run matters is that he was able to once again give the world music that matters.
That's completely true. Like, when I first heard, because growing up reading about Smile was like this magical myth that you'll never hear, and it was before the internet, so like there was no way to like find tapes of this stuff. So when he finally put it out, I remember going to the store and buying it and holding Smile for the first time, being like, "Whoa!" It was kind of like a trip. And then hearing Lucky Old Son for the first time, I was like, "Man, this guy's on a roll." And I loved that Gershwin album. It kept going and going, and No Peer Pressure is great. So like, he's put out music that's just as important now than he was making in the 60s. But like, it's just, I think it's the band loves to play with him, and he's got that spirit inside him still. I love watching videos of him in the studio these days because he's got that drive. You see it in his eyes. Like, you see that he's like going for those moments, like in Long Promised Road. I'm sure you've seen that by now.
Sure.
There's moments of him in the studio, and there's a part where he gets on the piano. Everyone's like, "Whoa, Brian's on the piano!" Like, it's like you can just feel the room go like, "Whoa, that's Brian on the piano!" Like that moment of like it takes you out of it for a second. You know?
I think you've hit on a key thing is surround him. He's a very sweet, giving person.
Yeah.
Surround him with love and security, and the best of him will come out. And the best of him is music.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a lot of fun to hang around with. But, ultimately, everybody's got to go to work.
Yeah.
He doesn't. He doesn't ever have to work again. So, we shouldn't overemphasize it. It wasn't like I saw him, 5 times a week. I got to spend a lot of time with him.
Yeah.
Through the years, personally and professionally, and it was always interesting. Let's put it that way. It was never the same. The room is Brian's.
Yeah.
When you're in the room, it's his. And you talked about how excited the band was in Long Promised Road when he sat down at the piano. I tell the story in the update of God Only Knows about the time he played Heroes and Villains at the piano, and it's all like head shakingly unbelievable.
Yeah.
I guess I keep saying that, but what I wrote is what I witnessed with my own eyes.
Right.
And so that became a big guidepost for me in this update. Did I write about the 50th anniversary? No, I wasn't there.
Right.
There were certain albums I wasn't around for. I didn't really say much about them.
Yeah.
There was a story that I witnessed and participated in that I wanted to tell. I wish the book could have been twice as long to include everything else I've written about him that's no longer available.
Yeah.
Like the liner notes and the books from the Pet Sounds box set and the program essays I wrote. No, I wanted that all in one place. Publisher didn't want it. Publisher was like, no, update the book.
So I mean, like you mentioned spending so much time with him and just like, being his friend. We've read so many things over the years about how funny Brian could be. Is he still kind of a prankster, a jokester? Does he still kind of goof around, or what's he kind of like these days in terms of
he's pretty quiet these days.
Is he really?
He's pretty quiet.
Yeah.
He's not he was a much more active, funny man before.
Yeah.
And sometimes, he would put you on just to see if you'd go for it, or he would legitimately be funny.
Yeah.
But there was always a sweetness to it.
One thing I wanted to ask you too is you mentioned in the book, and I don't want to give too many spoilers away for people who are going to read it, but like this was something I thought was fascinating. Was like you got to sing "Mr. Tambourine Man" to a track Brian made. Tell me more. Like, what was that about?
He always does the unexpected. So he calls me and he says, I'm in the studio, I'm recording Mr. Tambourine Man, print out the lyrics and bring them over. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you're a Dylanologist, it's like there's a lot of verses.
Yeah.
I always think of Tambourine Man as the Birds song.
Right.
That's the one I know the words to. Anyway, I printed out all the lyrics and I brought him over. And he said, okay, go out in the studio. We're going to record this together. You sing first and then I'll double you. And I was like, okay.
No pressure.
Well, I'm a ham. I love to sing. I can carry a tune. I'm not a Beach Boy as a singer. I don't have that kind of DNA or vocal quality.
Right.
At any rate, I sang it, and then he hits the top. He says, "Okay, double it." So I do it again, And okay, come on in. And so I went in the booth. I said, "When are you going to record?" He says, "No, I just wanted you to do it." And it was like, so he mixed it, and then he handed me a CD, and I've got it. I guess one of these decades it's got to come out. But that's I won't say that wasn't his sense of humor. It was like, I want to make a record. I want to record Tambourine Man. I think you might have the right voice for it.
That's so cool. What a special thing, like just having a one-off, your own thing. Like that's so cool.
Yeah, that was a very special gift. That was a gift from a friend.
Right. That leads me to my next question. You also mentioned singing on I'm a Bum, or He's a Bum, with Dennis. How did that happen?
So this was back when I was publishing the Pet Sounds fanzine, and Dennis was promoting the Pacific Ocean Blue. And I can't tell you the exact circumstances in terms of the sequence of events.
Sure.
But he had I think I was one of a handful of journalists who were in the studio, and he was going to show us how a record is made.
Oh my God.
How did the Beach Boys make a record? Anyway,
Right.
and so he had us sing on the chorus of this song he was working on called He's a Bum. And let me take a sip.
Sure.
I'll sing my line. So it was like, he's a bum, he's a sucker. And then we would sing, he's a dog without a bone. That was our line.
So cool.
And
so cool.
And it was at Brothers Studio in Santa Monica. And it was extremely, again, I'm sorry to use the word again, surreal. It's like, what am I doing in Brothers Studio with Dennis Wilson singing on a song? It kind of made no sense. And whether it was that night, maybe it was another night, he invited me to his home in Venice for a marathon interview.
Yeah.
Just like 5-6 hours.
Oh my God. I mean, like, what was he like in person? We see videos, we see things, we read about him being like a really generous, warm guy who had a wild side. Is that accurate? Like, what was your interpretation of him like?
Well, he was like if you stuck your finger in a plug. There was so much energy. I was going to say a light socket. I don't know is that a phrase that's used.
Yeah, I know what you meant. Yeah.
But he just had endless energy.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he didn't have the kind of discipline it takes to have a career.
Interesting.
And because if he had followed up Pacific Ocean Blue quickly with another album and then gone and done a solo tour and another solo tour, you have to build your career.
Oh yeah.
And in that era, I mean, I think I mentioned it in the book. Apparently, the Beach Boys could have recorded those songs.
I believe it.
The reason he made a solo album was they weren't interested.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that. Yeah.
And so if you want to rewrite Beach Boys history, imagine if in 1977 they had recorded the songs of Pacific Ocean Blue.
Oh man.
And it's a whole different history.
Absolutely.
But everything happens, and sadly, the way it's supposed to, I guess. And 5 or 6 years after it came out, I'm watching the news and he's gone. It was just terrible.
Unbelievable. I mean, like you mentioned, like rewriting history if they had done those songs. One of the things I wanted to ask you too is like in the 90s, I know the guys were working together for a real brief period. They did a couple of songs together. And then eventually they did the country album instead. Did the sessions just kind of like fizzle out, like lack of interest, or like people just weren't participating, or what happened there?
Well, here's the great thing about what I was doing. I was not involved in any of that.
Okay.
So I don't, people say, hey, you didn't write about this, you didn't write about that. Again, I tried to only write about what I knew.
Right. I love that.
In the first edition of the book, I was interviewing the people who were there from birth, like Audrey Wilson
Yeah.
and Rich Sloan and Gary Usher. I followed Brian's career.
Right.
The first line of the book, this is the story of Brian Wilson. I was trying to understand the story of Brian Wilson for myself and transmit that to the reader.
Yeah.
Since 1985, there are a number of people who could tell that story. Melinda Wilson is one.
Mm-hmm.
Brian is one, and he's not writing a book.
No.
And so I guess I was the one who was a writer who could tell the story, but I wanted the update to be both true and not exploitive.
Absolutely.
Because one could write an entire book about the 1980s, and it would be filled with gory detail, shall we say.
Yeah. I mean, that's not to go into a personal tangent, but that's something I would like to do someday, is write a book about the 80s, 90s, and beyond, because so much did happen that just hasn't been covered. Not necessarily hardcore stuff.
Please do.
I'd love to. It'd be awesome.
I really, I was kind of retro in my approach. And, particularly in the 1990s, we started focusing on all those reissues.
Right.
So we did the Good Vibrations box set. And, I remember, very, very cautiously, tentatively saying to Brian, going over the track listing with him. And he had a few suggestions of something that maybe should be there, that wasn't there, or something that didn't need to be there.
Yeah.
And then once we had done that, I said, well, Brian, there's one thing that's missing. I don't remember my exact words. And he was like, what's that? I said, well, the box goes from Good Vibrations to the single released version of Heroes and Villains, and there's nothing in between. Well, there's a lot of stuff that happened there. And this isn't about finishing Smile. This is about a retrospective collection of your and the Beach Boys' work. If we could put some Smile music there, that would help the story along. And he thought about it, and he didn't think about it for a long time. It was like, okay, what songs do you think should go there? And pretty obvious ones: Surf's Up, Wonderful, Cabin Essence, and group together for the first time what we as fans had done with stuff that had come out in previous versions, but used the Smile versions of them. So
right.
that again, while it wasn't Smile, it was as close as we were getting. I didn't think that we'd ever get any closer to it than that. And I think that's a reason the box set was so successful, was there was that grouping on, I guess, disc 2, was it?
Yeah.
And disc 5 had some Smile sessions. So there was, it was, and there was a lot of unreleased Beach Boys recordings besides those.
Yeah.
And so box sets are typically, we got to cram in every hit, every single, every B-side, and they don't really give you much. If you're a hardcore fan, it's like, what did I need this for?
Exactly.
Box,
Right.
and so as a fan, as a record buyer, I wanted to make sure again that we're getting our money's worth.
Yeah. I'm the exact same way. If I was doing a project like that, I would do the exact same thing. Like, because I look at things from my fans' perspective. Like, if I was to make a video, what would I want to listen to? Like, if I want to put on an album, what would I want to put on? Like, I get that. And
well, it was the same thing with the Pet Sound Sessions.
Right. I
mean, it was like, what do we want to hear? Well, we got to have the album in mono. We've always wanted to hear it in stereo. Duh.
Yeah.
Hey, what do those tracks sound like without vocals? What do the vocals sound like without tracks? I mean, this again. I think I said it's not. This isn't brain surgery. We're fans.
Right.
We know what we want.
Exactly.
And so I was in a position for a very short period to to help realize kind of some of those fan dreams.
It's so cool. And one thing I wanted to read up or mention that you talked about in the late '90s when you were working on these reissue projects was how early the idea of a Smile box set started in the late '90s. It didn't materialize till much later.
We actually in 1995, Brian and I went to meet with Capitol. We had mapped out a 5-year plan of reissues.
Whoa.
Because the Good Vibrations box was 30 years of the Beach Boys' best. So we looked at, okay, what are the 30-year anniversaries that are coming up that should be celebrated?
Right.
So there was going to be a 2-disc Good Vibrations Sessions disc in October of '96, the 30th anniversary.
Right.
And then in the spring of 1997, there was going to be a 30th anniversary Smile Sessions box, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Unbelievable.
The reaction inside the Beach Boys world to the Pet Sound Sessions box wasn't as positive as one would have thought. And so that was the end of me doing Beach Boy projects.
It's just mind blowing because like that's what keeps bands alive, especially these days, archival stuff for older bands, and that's, you know, there's always going to be new generations discovering this stuff and just drooling over it. And so there's always going to be a market for people wanting to hear unreleased older stuff. So it seems weird.
I think the time is kind of, the cow is pretty much milked dry. There's a few more things to do, because once you get past 1975, I don't know that's as much in the Beach Boys world that needs a deep excavation. You know, maybe pair Love You an Adult Child. I
It'll happen, I'm sure. Yeah.
But I know they're doing a Carl and the Passions Holland project.
Right.
And I feel like we've heard the best of that era. I don't know that there's much to surprise us. I'll be happy to be surprised.
I'm sure there's going to be some live stuff on there we haven't heard before, or hasn't been heard in a long time or something. But I have been petitioning for them to call that All This Is That this whole time, and I think they're going to call it Sail on Sailor. But I think All This Is That just sounds cool, man.
Well, that's a cool title. I mean, it was certainly the vibe of the period.
Yeah.
Sail on Sailor was more of a Brian vibe.
Yeah. Yeah, All This Is That just encompasses, like, Feel Flows was a great name for the last project. That was a great title. It just incorporates this sort of spiritual feeling, flow, water. Like the whole thing was like a groovy feel. It's like it made sense.
I would have been happy with Add Some Music to Your Day.
Oh, that would have been great too. Yeah. I don't think they'll ever use that title for anything ever again, though.
It's hard to understand. One of the things I write about in the book, when I wrote the first edition, I virtually knew nothing about the music industry.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, almost nothing. I had worked in the mailroom at Casablanca Records. I had been around little tiny press events and Beach Boy parties. Well, now here it is, 45 years later. I've worked with a lot of artists. I've seen how careers are built. I had no understanding of what it takes to have a career, build a career, maintain a career. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
It's so the fact that there's a Beach Boys out there touring at 60 years on.
Yeah.
Kudos to Mike and Bruce for doing that. I haven't seen this iteration of the group. I hear they have a terrific band, a great set list. Good for them for carrying it forward. What's exciting to me is what you referred to earlier, is new generations discovering the classic recordings.
Right.
However that takes place.
Yeah.
I teach a course on the Beatles, and there's an animated show called The Beat Bugs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're building the next group of Beatle fanatics.
It's awesome. I mean, I finally got to see the Mike and Bruce show in February, because I'd never seen just the two of them as the Beach Boys before. I saw the 50th anniversary tour. I saw Brand New Smile. So it was really cool to see this version of the band, and they sounded great. Mike and Bruce are still energetic. It was it was mind blowing to me to be there and be like, wow, that's the same guy that made Pet Sounds. It's the same guy who wrote for Sunflower. Like, you know, it was just, it's one of those things where you're just kind of like, that's the
Right.
same guy. It's right in front of me. Um, it's a
Yeah,
trip.
yeah. Look, the legends are disappearing right in front of our eyes.
I know. I know.
I mean, they look. They started disappearing back. You know, they called it they ended up calling it the Forever 27 Club.
Yeah.
Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Brian Jones. You know,
Jim Morrison.
Jim Morrison. Everybody going quickly.
Yeah.
And Dennis was not even 40 when he passed away. So it's you know, there's no guarantees of any of this. So it's good to focus on the music and celebrate it while the creators are still here.
Absolutely. And like, you know, I'll kind of wrap it up with you here. That's why I enjoy this book so much, is because it brings their story to or at least it brings Brian's story to the present, because his body of work, who he is as a person, it's so important to the fabric of music, let alone American music. Just his influence is worldwide at this point. But you really capture the spirit of what makes Brian and the Beach Boys so important to so many people. And it's a book that you can't put down. Once you start reading about it, I really felt like I was in your shoes, like going to these events with Brian, like walking around, like seeing these things, setting up these shows. You really get a feel of who he is. And, you know, for me as a fan, I just want to thank you for writing this book and putting it out again, because for me, it's like, as people have said forever, it's like the Bible of the Beach Boys. It really is. And, you know, so thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing this, because now I could share it with all my friends and we can look at it, we can read about it. It's something that needs to be on the shelf because the Beach Boys are so important. And this helps solidify that for the next generation.
Thank you. You know, it's going to be interesting because all that matters, we know nothing really about Bach,
yeah,
or Beethoven or Mozart.
Right.
But the music has survived.
Yeah.
We now live in a world where people record every single moment of their lives and post it online.
Yep.
This is somewhere in between, and it's, you know, it's written by a fan who loves and respects the music, for whom the music is extremely important in my life.
Yeah.
And so it's important that a fan picks it up and reads it. And unlike the first edition, unlike the updated edition in 1985, you don't walk away from this edition sad.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. This is a hopeful ending. It's a great positive feel to it. Absolutely.
And it's because Brian finally fulfilled the insane dream of Smile that he created in '66. And you know, when he came down the elevator at Royal Festival Hall the night of the first Smile concert, and the elevator landed and we stepped off and said, our Smile dream has come true. And it was like, first of all, he says our. That gives you a sense of how inclusive he is.
Yeah.
But that was a dream of a lot of people, and now it's almost 20 years later, and he's had a whole other career. I mean, yeah. and you know, he was never a great live performer in the 60s. In the 70s, he was a horrible live performer.
Yeah.
In the 80s, he was a horrible live performer. He kind of grew into it. But he was never, you know, an energetic, jumping about the stage kind of guy.
Right.
But you know, listen to Live at the Roxy, and you hear him coming into his own, allowing who he is as a sweet person inside to come out in front of people. And that was in front of, you know, 500 people.
Yeah.
That's kind of where he's comfortable. And as a performer, a couple of thousand maybe.
Yeah.
So he has soldiered on. The sailor has sailed on, and he has done it without really a complaint. It's like, this is my job,
Yeah.
and it's like I was touched by God to bring a good vibration to the world, so I'm going to do it no matter what.
And we feel it. We absolutely feel it. There's nothing been, as a fan of the Beach Boys, I think you feel that honesty from him. I've never met him. Who knows if I ever will someday, but like you feel like you get an idea of what he's trying to put out. What was that quote that he said one time where it was like, music is God's voice or something, or God channeling through you, or,
Yeah,
we believe it. We feel it.
Music, he said music is God's voice.
Yeah.
And he's talked in interviews about, it feels like God is plopping my hands on the fingers and shaping the chords.
Yeah.
I guess you would have to believe that if you were making divine music.
Yeah. Well,
he's not recording "Walk on the Wild Side." he's singing "Love and Mercy."
Yeah. It's incredible. It's an incredible career. David, I could talk to you for hours. Thank you so much for being here. The book is out now through England's Amazon website. It'll be out in America in September. Is that right?
September 22nd.
September 22nd. Okay. Your book means a lot to me and to so many people. Thank you for putting it out again so the next generation can discover how totally magical this band is, how much they mean to so many people. Just thank you for your work. It's incredible.
Thank you, sir. And spoiler alert, those of you who are watching Giggens gets called out in the book. I won't tell you for what.
Thank you, David. All right.
Thank you, man. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.